In the frozen stillness of Greenland, a child lies beneath the earth, her body untouched for over 4,000 years. She belonged to no tribe we know, spoke no language preserved in story, and carried in her blood a legacy that would vanish long before the first Europeans stepped on this land. When scientists extracted her DNA, they expected to find Inuit ancestry. What they found instead defied every expectation. Her genome matched no living people. Not the Inuit, not Native Americans, not even the Siberian groups from which many Arctic populations descend. It was something older, colder, more distant, a complete genetic ghost. Her people had arrived in Greenland thousands of years ago and left no descendants. But this is only the beginning. Today, the Greenlandic population stands as one of the most genetically distinct in the world. Their DNA is a fusion of ancient survival and modern collision. 75% of their ancestry comes from Inuit ancestors who migrated from Alaska 1,000 years ago. The other 25%, almost entirely Danish, recent, sudden, and overwhelmingly male. Yet even these two threads don't explain the full picture. Greenlanders carry adaptations so extreme, so specialized, they're found nowhere else on Earth. Genes that rewrite how fat is metabolized. Variants that make sugar a threat, but seal fat a source of power. Some of these adaptations may not even be fully modern. Their closest match lies in the genomes of archaic humans. The deeper scientists dig, the more questions emerge. What happened to the first Greenlanders? Why was their genetic legacy completely erased? And how did those who came after evolve in near-total isolation to carry traits no other population on Earth possesses? The answer begins with a migration and a disappearance. The first people to walk the ice fields of Greenland came not from Europe, but from the far reaches of Siberia. Around 4,500 years ago, they crossed the roof of the world in silence, carrying with them stone tools, bone needles, and a genetic legacy that would soon disappear. Archaeologists call them the Saqqaq, but in genetic terms, they were something far stranger. When their ancient DNA was recovered from a single hair found in permafrost, it told a story the land had long buried. The Saqqaq genome was complete, pristine, untouched by modern contamination, yet it showed no connection to the people living in Greenland today. None. They weren't the ancestors of the Inuit. They weren't linked to the Dorset who came later. And they left no trace in the genome of any living population. Their DNA shares a distant echo with certain Siberian groups, the Koryaks, the Nganasin, but even there, the signal fades quickly. These were not the forerunners of today's Arctic cultures. They were a parallel branch, and they're gone. After them came the Dorset, around 2,500 years ago, another Paleo-Eskimo culture. Their tools were different. Their dwellings shifted with the ice. But their genetic legacy was no stronger. When they disappeared from Greenland between 1300 and 1500 AD, they vanished entirely, leaving not a single strand of DNA in the living population. The reasons remain unknown. Was it climate collapse? Disease? A silent conquest? And then came the Thule. Around the year 1000, a new wave of people began moving east from Alaska. They hunted bowhead whales, used dog sleds, and carried technology far more advanced than anything seen in Greenland before. Within a few centuries, they had spread across the entire island. The Dorset were gone. The Thule remained. And they are the ancestors of the Greenlandic Inuit today. The transition wasn't gradual. There was no genetic mixing, no blending of lineages. The Thule didn't just replace the Dorset, they erased them. The genomes of modern Greenlanders show no trace of Saqqaq or Dorset DNA. What happened was not assimilation. It was replacement. Total, swift, and absolute. This is where the uniqueness of Greenlandic DNA begins. Not in survival, but in disappearance. Because to understand why Greenlanders today are so genetically distinct, we must first understand the people who came before, and why they're not in the genome anymore. The Thule weren't just migrants. They were architects of a new genetic world. Their journey began in what is now Alaska, where their ancestors had mastered Arctic survival in ways the Paleo-Inuit never had. They built boats to track whales across treacherous seas. They bred dogs for sleds. They forged weapons from driftwood and bone. And then they moved east fast. By the year 1300, They had reached Greenland's coasts. Archaeology tells us they arrived in waves, following a northern arc from the Canadian Arctic into the western shores of Greenland, then curving south and east. But their genetic trail tells an even more precise story. A single colonizing pulse. One migration. One founding event. One population that would shape the DNA of Greenland for centuries. From the moment they arrived, isolation set in. Greenland is vast but nearly empty. A landscape of fractured ice, scattered settlements, and silence. The Thule didn't mix with others, because there were no others left to mix with. The Saqqaq and Dorset were already gone. No Viking blood entered their line. The genetic silence surrounding the Norse is deafening. There's no evidence of admixture. No buried traces of Scandinavian genes in the Inuit genome. What followed was a genetic bottleneck on a scale rarely seen in human populations. The entire modern Greenlandic population descends from what may have been just a few hundred Thule settlers. Their DNA, already limited, began to drift. Certain variants became common. Others vanished entirely. And without gene flow from the outside world, the Greenlandic genome became something singular, narrow in diversity, rich in uniqueness. Today, genetic studies reveal a sharp structure within Greenland's population. The people of the East, West, and North carry subtle differences, shaped by the pattern of the original migration. In places like Colonial and Tassilak, where geography guarded against contact, even the 25% European admixture that now exists elsewhere is barely present. The Thule weren't just survivors of the Arctic, they became captives of it. Locked within the ice, their descendants began evolving on a different trajectory than any other population on Earth. What does it mean to evolve under the pressure of cold, hunger, and darkness? For thousands of years, Greenlanders lived on a diet that would kill most humans: raw blubber, fermented seal, fish skins rich in omega-3 fats, and almost no plant-based sugars. There were no grains, no fruits, no starch. In that brutal diet, over countless generations, the genome adapted, and the adaptations it produced are unlike anything seen in the rest of the human species. One of the most powerful examples lies on chromosome 11, a cluster of genes known as FADS1, FADS2, and FADS3. These control how the body processes polyunsaturated fatty acids. In most people, the body converts plant fats into brain-essential compounds like DHA and EPA. But in Greenlanders, this process is already optimized for marine fat. Their FADS genes don't convert, they regulate. The same variant that would cause problems in someone on a Western diet becomes life-saving in a body fueled by seal and whale. Another adaptation is found in CPT1A, a gene involved in breaking down long-chain fatty acids into energy. In the Greenlandic population, a unique variant of CPT1A is near universal, a signature of strong natural selection. It helps release energy from fat reserves during fasting and cold exposure. But in outsiders, that same variant can be dangerous. This is not a universal benefit. It is an Arctic solution for an Arctic problem. Then there's TBC1D4, a gene that affects how muscles absorb glucose. A specific mutation here increases the risk of type 2 diabetes, especially after meals. And yet, paradoxically, for much of Greenland's past, this mutation may have helped. On a sugar-free diet, its effects remain silent, perhaps even beneficial. Only with the arrival of processed carbohydrates did its shadow emerge, a gene shaped by ice, now clashing with sugar. But some adaptations go deeper, beyond Homo sapiens. The TBX15 and WARS2 genes, tied to fat storage and cold tolerance, show a genetic signature that is not fully modern. Their closest match lies in the genome of a people long extinct, the Denisovans. A small fragment of their DNA appears to have survived in the ancestors of Arctic populations. And in Greenland, that fragment became critical. It is likely that Denisovan admixture contributed directly to the ability of Inuit bodies to generate heat from brown fat, a hidden inheritance from an ancient interbreeding event 40,000 years ago. This is what makes Greenlandic DNA so unique. It's not just about ancestry. It's about what the genome had to become in order to survive. Every mutation, every variant, every silent gene is a record of pressure, selection, and adaptation. This is not evolution in theory. This is evolution made flesh. In small populations, chance becomes destiny. For the Greenlandic Inuit, that truth is written across their genome like a scar. Their ancestors arrived in a single wave. Their numbers were few, and in the centuries that followed, there was no new gene flow to dilute what they carried. This is the raw condition in which genetic drift takes over, where rare variants can become common, not because they help, but because there's no one else to balance them out. One of the clearest examples lies in a mutation within the ADP8B1 gene, a tiny error, invisible for generations, that today causes a rare but devastating liver disease called cholestasis familiaris Groenlandica. In certain eastern communities, like at Tokakortawarmite and Tasiilaq, its frequency is alarmingly high. Not because of selection, not because of migration, but because a handful of the original founders happened to carry it, and the population was too small to lose it. A similar story plays out with sucrose intolerance, a condition virtually unknown in most of the world. In Greenland, around 4% of population lacks the ability to digest sucrose at all, due to a mutation in the SI gene. In a modern context, it's a dietary burden. But for generations on a sugarless, protein-heavy diet, it may have been neutral, even invisible. Then there's diabetes. A particular variant in the TBC1D4 gene increases post-meal glucose levels dramatically, a red flag in modern metabolic health. Yet it's common among Greenlanders. The reason again is demographic, not adaptive. A small population with limited diversity is vulnerable to the amplification of harmful traits. Over time, what begins as a random mutation in one individual can become a widespread genetic signature. This is the price of isolation. Genetic drift doesn't discriminate. It elevates both beneficial and harmful alleles alike. And when paired with founder effects, the limited gene pool of the first settlers, the consequences become permanent. Unlike larger populations, Greenlanders don't carry a wide variety of rare variants. They carry fewer, but those they do carry exist at unusually high frequencies. That's what makes them both a challenge and a gift to genetic research. Certain diseases appear more common, not because of environment, but because of demographic history. And that history, shaped by ice, silence, and separation, has frozen their genome into something uniquely powerful and uniquely fragile. No European left a stronger genetic imprint on Greenland than the Danes. But their influence didn't begin in ancient times, and it didn't arrive through conquest. It came later, and it came quietly, through settlement, colonization, and male-biased gene flow that rewired Greenlandic DNA without replacing it. Around 1721, Denmark began formal colonization of Greenland. Over the next 3 centuries, a slow demographic shift unfolded. European whalers, missionaries, and colonial officials entered the Arctic world, and through them, European DNA followed. But this wasn't a population merger. It was a targeted infusion. Today, over 80% of Greenlanders carry at least some European ancestry. On average, a quarter of the Greenlandic genome is European, and nearly all of it is Danish. Earlier European presences, like the Norse settlers from 1,000 years ago, left no trace. Genetic analysis reveals no measurable contribution from them. The admixture we see is modern, precise, and overwhelmingly paternal. This is not speculation. The Y chromosome data speaks clearly. The European DNA in Greenland flows mostly through men. In contrast, mitochondrial DNA, passed down through mothers, remains largely Inuit. The pattern is unmistakable. European men, Inuit women, a gendered genetic legacy of colonial contact. But even within Greenland, this legacy isn't uniform. Geography has shaped how admixture unfolded. In regions like Colonial in the far north and Tasiilaq in the east, European influence is minimal. These areas remained isolated, buffered by geography and history. In contrast, in western and southern regions, especially near former Danish trade posts, the European component is far more pronounced. Yet for all its presence, this admixture didn't dilute the uniqueness of Greenlandic DNA. It layered onto it. The Inuit genome remains dominant, structurally intact, and genetically distinct from both the European source and other Arctic populations. In fact, the admixture has helped highlight just how unique the Inuit component is, revealing levels of linkage disequilibrium and ancestral divergence that become even more visible when contrasted against the Danish overlay. What makes this even more remarkable is how recent this genetic shift is. Much of the European ancestry in modern Greenlanders entered the gene pool in just the last few generations. This is not a slow erosion, it's a modern redefinition. A genome shaped by ancient migrations, refined by isolation, and then subtly reshaped by history's colonial tides. Across the Arctic, from Siberia to Alaska, from northern Canada to Scandinavia, indigenous populations have adapted to similar environments: ice, cold, darkness, and the relentless demand of survival. And yet, genetically, Greenlanders stand apart. The cold may be shared, but the ancestry is not. At first glance, Greenlandic Inuit appear closely related to other Inuit populations, and in many ways they are. Their ancestry ties back to the same Thule Migration that swept across the North American Arctic 1,000 years ago. Canadian Inuit, Alaskan Inupiat, and Greenlandic Inuit all share that lineage. They inherited many of the same Arctic adaptations, like the CPT1A variant for fat metabolism, and similar signatures in the FADS gene cluster. But that's where the convergence ends. Because Greenlanders, isolated by ocean and ice, took a different genetic path. Studies show that while they share common origins with other Inuit groups, they've diverged significantly. A comparison with Nunavik Inuit from northern Canada suggests a genetic separation that began nearly 10,500 years ago, far earlier than the Thule Migration, pointing to complex ancestry components beneath the surface. Even within Greenland, there's structure. The populations of the east, west, and north each carry subtle but meaningful genetic differences, shaped by migration patterns and local isolation. These distinctions are not seen in other Arctic regions, where populations remained more fluid. In Greenland, the ice divided as much as it preserved. Greenlanders also differ sharply from the Sami of northern Scandinavia, another indigenous Arctic population, but with a completely different ancestral foundation. The Sami carry both European and Asian genetic inputs, and their mitochondrial DNA tells a story of Eurasian fusion. In contrast, Greenlandic Inuit mitochondrial lineages are almost entirely Inuit, with minimal outside influence until modern times. Even their genetic diseases diverge. Greenlanders show elevated prevalence of conditions like CFG, sucrose intolerance, and specific diabetes-linked mutations that are either rare or absent in neighboring groups. These aren't just shared Arctic problems, they're unique outcomes of bottlenecks, drift, and a deep genetic past frozen in place. This is what makes Greenlandic DNA exceptional. Not just the adaptations, but the evolutionary isolation. Not just the similarities to other Arctic peoples, but the differences that reveal how separate the path has been. They are not a genetic outpost. They are their own genomic ecosystem, shaped by disappearance, migration, and silence. In the quiet between ice and ocean, Greenland keeps its secrets. Beneath frozen soil and inside living cells, its DNA tells a story unlike any other. A story of disappearance, survival, and a kind of evolutionary solitude that few populations have ever known. The Saqqaq and Dorset peoples, who once hunted along these coasts, are gone. Their languages, their customs, their names, all erased. Their genomes offer no roots to the people who live here now. It is as if two human histories passed each other in the cold and never touched. Then came the Thule. Their descendants remain, carrying within them the genetic imprint of their ancestors, and something else. A transformation shaped not by empire or war, but by snow, famine, and isolation. The adaptations in their genome are not luxuries. They are the difference between death and endurance. Fat became fuel. Sugar became threat. Cold became a sculptor of flesh and metabolism. Even fragments of archaic human DNA were preserved because they offered one more weapon against the elements. Greenlanders are not just a people of the present. They are a living archive of what the human genome can become when pushed to its limits. And yet, this uniqueness comes at a cost. The same isolation that shaped their strengths also froze and placed their vulnerabilities: recessive diseases, limited diversity, genetic drift that amplifies both adaptation and risk. What we see in Greenland is not just a different population. It is a different evolutionary path. No other people carry precisely this blend of ancient adaptation and recent admixture, of erased ancestries and surviving lineages. No other group holds, in their blood, both the silence of those who disappeared and the resilience of those who remain. The genome of Greenlanders is not just a map of who they are. It's a warning. It's a mystery. It's a reminder that history leaves marks we cannot see, unless we learn to read them in the code. And perhaps the most haunting question of all is this: if the Saqqaq child could speak, if her voice could rise again through the cold, what would she say about a world that forgot she ever lived?